Welcome to Law and Justice. I'm Jane Mulcahy. This is a special series on the topic of relationships matter. And today I am very, very excited to be talking to Beth Wallace. Hi, Beth. How are you?
Hi, Jane. I'm great. Thank you. So pleased to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm really delighted that we managed to find the time to connect and share information and knowledge. So, Beth, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself and your background before we get into the material?
Sure. So I guess in terms of today, the topic that we're talking about, it's relevant for me, I feel, to share both kind of personal background and also professional background. And so professionally, I'm a psychotherapist and I've been working, I guess, in personal community development for about 33 years.
Wow.
So that spans counseling, psychotherapy, pure community development, with lots of different communities. I've worked with travelers, I've worked with young people selling sex, I've worked with in sexual health and drugs education. But for the last 11 years, I've been self-employed as a psychotherapist, and my focus has been in that time on relationships, sex and sexuality. So prior to that, I would have been sort of, for example, I worked for 8 or 9 years as the education officer for what used to be Dublin AIDS Alliance, which is now HIV Ireland. So most of my background is in non-governmental organizations, community-based projects. I think I've spent 1 year working for a for-profit organization in 33 years, and 1 year was enough. Thanks a million. So very broad base of experience. I'm an applied psychology graduate, a psychotherapist, and I've done some other sort of academic training here and there in various other topics. And most of my work now focuses on working with individuals and couples in terms of their intimate relationships. Their relationships with themselves, with other people, romantic, intimate partners, but also their relationship with the world and life. Because our relationship with relationships doesn't just end with people. It also, for me, includes how we engage with life and living, how we engage with the natural world, how we engage with everything around us. So that's kind of my broad view on relationships. It isn't just about people. It's about how we engage with everything that we experience. So I live in the south of Spain, and I've been here consistently for the last 2 years, but on and off for the 2 years before that. I'm originally from Dublin. Very nice. I do struggle with the language, though, has to be said. I'm originally from Dublin, but I spent nearly 20 years in West Cork, and I guess that would be where I kind of split home psychologically between West Cork and Dublin. So I was born in a mother and baby home, one of those places that most Irish people will have definitely heard of. I was born in the oldest one, which was established in 1765, I think. So it was the first built in Ireland, and it closed in 1994. So it was also one of the last to close. It was probably the longest running one. Unusually for most people, it was a Protestant one. There were very few of those. And I'll get more into that as we talk more, just in terms of how the texture of that is a little bit different to most people's experience and knowledge. So I was adopted around the age of 2. I spent the majority of the time between birth and adoption in an orphanage, and then in and out of, and I guess we'll come back to this too, maybe when we're talking about something like attachment. I spent the second, about a year or so in and out of home with my birth mother.
Oh, right.
So again, quite an unusual experience for somebody born in mother and baby homes. Most people would have had the experience of very soon after birth, either going to an institution or to adoption. Mine's kind of a mishmash of several of those. So adopted around age 2 to a family that it was not safe for a child to be adopted into. And so I've spoken quite publicly and freely about this before, that I was sexually abused in that family. And my experience of that also is quite detailed. Feel free to ask me any question about any of it at any time, and I'm more than happy to share. So I guess I come at my work, and the reason why I do the work I do is because of the life I lived before I started working.
Sure.
And so I wanted to understand, I wanted to sort of both cognitively and emotionally understand why what happened to me, and why it happens to other children, and why it happens to other women and other children. And And I got that. I got an understanding from my academic study as to why these things happen. And I felt then, I guess in my early 20s, that I could put all of that experience to good use through supporting other people. And that's what I've been attempting and trying to do for the last 30 years. And of course, my own kind of personal development in that time has grown. My own self-awareness has deepened. I know a lot more now than I did then. And that's my journey is personally is also my professional journey.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that with me, Beth. And I knew quite a lot of that already. Can I just say I'm very sorry for what happened to you, all that, you know, the tumultuous early life experiences. And I can only really imagine what it might be like. But of course, it's not, at least the being born in a mother and baby home is not an uncommon experience. It's part of Irish history. Lots of babies were born in those institutions. Lots of girls and women ended up there, and they were unkind, uncompassionate, unsafe places. From your professional and your personal experience, how important are our attachment relationships as babies?
I think I'm tempted to say they're everything. They're not quite everything, of course, because how we are in the world is formed by so much more than that. It's formed by, you know, the environments, other environments. It's formed by personality, you know, ancestral lineage of all sorts of things. But they're almost everything, I think. And we can see when attachment isn't present is when I think we see how important it is to be present. So when a lot of my clients are also survivors of mother and baby homes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, because I think I've spoken so openly about it. And people, you know, I'm also clear that I'm a psychotherapist, that attracts a lot of people who are struggling with relationship issues in adulthood, struggling with intimate relationships. That they feel maybe there's an understanding that I can offer, perhaps that other psychotherapists can't. So what I see with people who've lost attachment to their birth mother, either immediately or very soon after birth, is almost a lifelong struggle to find a way of feeling attached to other people that is comfortable. That doesn't re-traumatize, that doesn't paralyze, that doesn't cause a further traumatic response. That there is an openness to relationship. Because, you know, and you know this intimately, and I'm sure lots of people watching also know this, that when our early attachments are broken, or they aren't allowed or permitted to be established, then it sets a precedent for an expectation that this is also going to happen, or it sets a precedent that I am unworthy of love. I am unworthy of someone else attaching to me. And that can then present itself in a lot of different ways. It can present itself in terms of, please love me, please pay attention to me, please notice me, please don't leave me. And hooking into relationships that are ultimately potentially damaging and harmful because they feel familiar. There's a texture of familiarity around abandonment and rejection. And for people who've experienced early trauma, the familiarity gets confused for, it gets confused for love. It gets confused for something that's substantial, nourishing, and nurturing, simply because it's familiar, not because it's good.
Does it maybe feel safe? Does the familiar feel safe even when it's actually unsafe?
Absolutely, because I think a lot of people who've experienced early trauma, it's what we know. What we know as children and adolescents is dissociation, it's dysregulation, it's fear, it's being primed for hypervigilance, it's all of those things. And so anything that is calm, stable, secure, nourishing, nurturing feels weird. It doesn't feel familiar. It doesn't feel right. I don't quite know what to do with that. And so if we continue that then into adult relationships, that's a pretty toxic place for for, the cauldron of an adult intimate relationship to grow in. And so we will see lots of people, particularly coming back to the mother and baby home issue, we'll see lots of people who have struggled with attachment in early years, having trouble then either creating or sustaining and maintaining long-term satisfying, mutually satisfying adult relationships.
And might they sometimes also have problems parenting, or where they don't quite know how to maybe display nurture and care, or it doesn't maybe come naturally to them because they never experienced it? I presume in mother and baby homes, there weren't a whole pile of cuddles and kisses and, the serve and return interactions that we now know are so important for healthy child development.
Absolutely. If we imagine that a baby is left for weeks or months in a home, the mother is left, or the child has been separated in preparation for adoption, how much time is that child spending crying and not being picked up, not being met? How much time is that child being spending outside of simple human touch and human embrace, which we also know is absolutely essential for feeling safe in the world? And so, I often compare, some people don't like it, but I often compare us to computers in that our life experiences are the software. And so if our life experience, if our software is, you don't get touched, you don't get attention, you can cry and scream, and the sound of your own crying and screaming filters through and imprints, then of course we can't know how to then offer that to our own children. Certainly lots of people that I know who are survivors have chosen not to have children, and that's part of the reason is a sense of, I don't know how to do that, and therefore I'm not even going to try. I'm too afraid that I won't do it well because I didn't have it, and therefore I'm not going to do it. And certainly, there are many reasons why I never had children, but certainly that was very definitely there in my conscious thinking about it in my 20s. Was I didn't have XYZ that is necessary for providing a very safe, nurturing, nourishing environment for a child. I don't know if I can do that the way it needs to be done. So absolutely. And I think, sort of thinking about it, zooming out on the kind of macro level, in terms of how does trauma, how does lack of attachment, how does lack of secure attachment impact us on a collective level? I think this is huge in that, sort of making repair and offering people supports needs to happen at various different levels of our society. It's not just the people who are directly impacted by trauma who are affected by it. It's also our children. It's also our neighbors. It's also the people we work with. It's also the people that, are behind the cash register in the supermarket. The thread through the weave of life that is trauma weaves its way through every single interaction we have. So of course it's going to be there in parenting too.
Just on the choosing not to have children, perhaps due to a trauma history, it strikes me that women have to answer a lot of ignorant questions from random people, saying, you don't have children. Do you want children? When are you going to have children? Do you think that's a harmful question for women in particular to have to answer, Beth? Because not everyone might be comfortable disclosing a trauma history, or it's not polite dinner party conversation maybe. So is it safer maybe to just leave that to people's own privacy and not have it as a topic of conversation in general, do you think?
Yeah, I think sort of culturally, women are viewed as somehow defective if they don't want to have their own children, B, don't particularly like children. There's something defective about, there is a sort of a cultural narrative around that, much more so in some countries than others, but I think particularly in Ireland there is still a lingering that still lingers. I think there are many reasons why people don't have children. People don't have children because they can't. People don't have children because they don't want to. People don't have children because they feel like they don't have enough money to be able to do so well yet, but maybe they will in 5 years. Is it any of anybody else's business? Not in the slightest. Not in the slightest. Just like, how much money do you have in your bank account? Equally, none of anybody else's business. What color is your underwear? None of anyone's business. Why the question is acceptable, just it's a mystery to me, I have to say. A mystery to me. And I would I think there's ways of phrasing it. If someone's genuinely curious, there's a way of phrasing it that perhaps allows somebody to get out of answering the question more easily. So, for example, have you ever thought about having children? That's perhaps a gentler way of saying, and the option is yes or no. And then you can say more if you want. But I think maybe it's time we stopped asking women to justify or explain their reproductive lives to us in any way, shape, or form.
Indeed. I just imagine where trauma histories are a factor in that decision-making process, that also being truthful might go down like a lead balloon, as the other thing, that you won't be then met with compassion and validation, but kind of a stony silence.
Right. And, your example of if you're at a dinner party and the reason why you don't have children is because you've been through 6 rounds of IVF and you can't face any more. That's the end of the dinner party joy, or, well, actually, I was sexually abused as a child and I don't feel like I have that capacity within me to be a parent. Yeah. Stony silence, absolutely.
Stony silence, indeed.
And I think for those of us who are survivors of significant trauma, we have to choose it. There is that level of self-awareness where I have to choose, how much of myself do I reveal in this situation? What are the consequences potentially going to be to that? Do I have the capacity within me today to deal with that? Maybe I did yesterday, but maybe I don't today. So people quite often ask me, well, given what you've experienced in life, it's amazing that you're a living, breathing, reasonably functional human being. And I agree, yes, it is, but it is a daily management. It is very often a moment-to-moment management in terms of checking in with oneself. How am I feeling? How does this feel? How is this situation? How's my breathing? How's my muscle tension? How's my stomach? Have I gone into my head? Have I dissociated from my body? Those that checklist still has to happen. And I think it probably still will, and for the rest of my life, I imagine. But that's where self-awareness, the therapeutic process, is essential for somebody who's got a trauma history.
And can I ask you, in terms of learning about trauma and attachment and getting the academic knowledge and maybe learning just how common certain symptoms are that perhaps you thought were unique to you, do you think that knowledge in general is very important for survivors to get, that it shouldn't just be kept to the small group of professionals or psychologists or psychotherapists or whoever, psychiatrists as well, maybe, or social workers? Does it need to get into the public domain, even when people are maybe not yet ready for therapy?
Yeah, I absolutely 100% think so. And this is why I admire and respect your work so much, is because that's something that you're doing. And I think it is absolutely key. Not only is it key for trauma survivors, but it's key for our partners, our children, our friends, our lovers, our neighbors, our co-workers, everybody. So that we look through a lens at every person that we interact with, and that lens is a trauma-informed lens. It is, okay, I'm sitting at a dinner party, the conversation's gotten, this is just an example, I'm sitting at a dinner party, the conversation's gotten serious, and I can see that there's a woman at the end of the table, for example, she doesn't look like she's breathing. She looks like she's stopped breathing. I can see that she's playing with her napkin. Now she's breathing quite quickly. Oh, right. What's the topic of conversation? Oh, it's rape. Okay, so somehow this conversation, I can see in this woman's body that it's affecting her. I have a choice then. Do I change the topic of conversation? Perhaps I can say, hey, Mary, how's the pumpkin pie down there? And I can acknowledge her. I can bring her back out of her head, out of wherever she's gone in terms of memory, and I can say, hey, I see you. I'm with you here. You're not on your own. I don't need you to talk to me about it, but I'm noticing. And the only reason I'm noticing is because I know what I'm looking at.
Yes.
And so that is essential. One of the ways that I see that in my work is very often with women who have experiences of some form of sexual assault or sexual violence. Perhaps they don't even call it rape, but it was a sexual experience, maybe where they were drunk, they woke up, something was happening that they hadn't consented to. They don't want to describe it as rape. Somebody else would maybe describe it as rape. And they share with me, and I'm in a very privileged position to hear that. They share with me, when I get into a new situation with a guy, I find myself like almost not being able to breathe. My muscles are kind of shaking. I'm so excited. Now, here's the thing. I'm so excited because I'm shaking. And I'm like, is that shaking really excitement? Or what else is happening in your body? I can't really breathe properly. Okay, can you feel your whole body? Can you feel like the sensations in your legs and your feet and your back and your arms and your shoulder? Oh, not really. So that shaking is not excitement. That shaking is fear.
Okay.
And that happens quite a lot. Wow. And a lot of women confuse that, and men do too. They confuse that for sexual arousal and excitement, which it can also be. Because arousal in the nervous system is arousal in the nervous system.
Yeah, sure.
And it looks exactly the same sometimes. The only difference is what else is going on, what's the history, and what's happening in the thinking. And it's only in the context. And so it's only by having that information about trauma, what it looks like, how it happens, why it happens, that we're able to experience that and go, hang on here a second. Actually, that's not happy body arousal.
Yes.
That's arousal because I'm afraid. Crap. I need to now do something about that and figure out why it is that my body's having this trauma response. And if I'm in a long-term relationship with somebody, how can we navigate that and negotiate that in our sex life with each other? So it doesn't become something that is a barrier to the relationship.
Yeah, it strikes me really that it's not just a survivor issue, as you say, that if I'm a man who wants to have a sexual relationship with anyone, really, male or female, that really I'm on notice that I need to be tuning into signs as well. And know about shutdown responses and how fear can manifest, and not take everything as a big, massive go ahead. I'm loving this.
Absolutely. And, things like silence doesn't equal yes, if the body isn't responding, if the body isn't moving freely, if there's kind of rigidity, pay attention to that, because that means something's not right. Something's not okay. And, one of my kind of bugbears in relation to porn is that we see very often, we see women as servicing male sexual pleasure in the pornographic context. And that just sort of fuels exactly what you've said. It exacerbates that this power dynamic in relation to men and women, in relation to sex and sexual pleasure. So I think absolutely it's essential, whether it's parents with children who are parents who, children who've experienced something traumatic, whether it's siblings, in order to be able to be more supportive of their sibling, whether it's a lover. And that's our most intimate place, our most vulnerable place, is when we're in a lover relationship with somebody. That's where we're fully exposed. And so that's why I think in that context, in that relationship, it's most necessary.
Yes. To go back now, I might follow up on some of the things there that'll percolate in my mind, but I do want to go back to Ireland's history of institutional abuse and the individual and collective dimensions, but specifically for now, the individual ones. What's your own assessment of the state's handling of these historical and often gender-based forms of abuse, such as the way girls and women were treated in Magdalene laundries and mother and baby homes, Beth?
Have you got a few days?
No, not quite.
Yeah. I think I find it very difficult to answer this question because I think it's so multi-layered. It's so complex. And I guess I have a choice as to which, piece of it I can kind of focus in on. And the piece that I'm choosing to focus in on is our history in recent years of what a friend of mine calls single outcome politics. So it's different to single issue politics in that it's about having the outcome. So same-sex marriage, repeal the eighth, they're both perfect examples of single outcome politics. Okay. That there's a campaign, there's a movement, there's a kind of a zeitgeist, there's a push towards a single outcome. And the rest of the issues associated with that particular topic are kind of pushed to the side. And they're not seen as being relevant, really. So repeal the eighth, I think, is a perfect example of that for me. I mean, I was involved in the campaign. I told my own personal story of having had an abortion, fully behind it all the way. However, as you say, it is that happened in the context of generations of women in Ireland being viewed in a particular way and being treated in a particular way. There is a context, there is a whole fabric of which repeal the eighth was just one thread. Mm-hmm. And so part of my difficulty with that is when we focus on the single thread, we lose the rest of the fabric. Mm. And so it's almost a similar happened when the report, the investigative commission's report came out, in that there was a response to it. But again, this is just one thread of that fabric. Mm. And the fabric is, how have we viewed women? How have we viewed and treated women as a society? And let's not look at these single issues. Let's zoom out a little bit and look at, okay, well, here's how women have been treated in terms of, here's how women are viewed in our constitution. Here's repeal the eighth. Here's the mother and baby homes. Here's the Magdalene laundries. Here's all of these various different issues that are all actually part of the same issue. Let's stop looking at them as individuals and look at them as a whole. Mm-hmm. And I think that requires an enormous amount of courage. I'm not quite sure that we're ready for that in Ireland. But I think perhaps we are, if the right people were to say, hang on, let's stop looking at the single issues, let's zoom out a bit and let's look at this in a more holistic way and in a more holistic manner. So I think to some degree, looking at it as a single issue, it allows government off the hook to a certain degree because they can focus on the single issue. They can appear to be doing X, Y, and Z, whereas in actual fact, other issues are falling off the wayside. Cervical cancer checks and physiotomy, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So in terms of how the government how, for example, this particular government and the one before it have responded and how they've acted, I guess to demonstrate what I feel about that is to say that I've exited the process.
Oh, right. Okay. You're done.
I'm done. Yeah, I'm done. I still get the emails from the department that all of the vested interested parties receive, but I won't be attending any further meetings. I won't be contributing any further submissions. I feel like it is absolutely pointless at this point. There have been far too many opportunities for hope to be, the volume of hope to be turned up, and each one turns out to be a waste of time, a waste of taxpayers' money, and a waste of the emotional energy and workload that survivors have had to input in order for those things to happen.
Thank you for your reflections there, Beth. Just on the single issue, single outcome politics, for some of the elderly women who were impacted by the Magdalene laundries or the mother and baby homes, is there not maybe a case though that they need their issue and their outcomes dealt with, whereas you're a younger person who can see the whole and has hopefully time maybe to get some redress, or at least hope for resolving some of our gender-based messed upness in Ireland. Whereas if you're old and you need medical bills or whatever else, an apology, might that be a reason why some activists have got behind particular issues for particular outcomes, do you think?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I agree, of course, that we can't abandon, the single issues in favor of an overarching approach. I think we need both. And certainly you're absolutely right in the fact that there are, women who are now in their 70s, 80s and 90s who deserve much more than they've received from, I would go so far as to say, state and church and society. Yeah, absolutely. I think there needs to be both in a parallel approach.
Okay. And do you believe that trauma responses that manifest in individuals, such as denial or numbing and dissociative splitting, can manifest at the collective level, Beth?
Yes, for sure. If I look at, if I look at Irish society and I look at how is our society functioning through exactly that lens that you've just described, numbing, splitting, dissociating, what's our relationship to alcohol? What's our relationship to the environment that we live in? How are we polluting the body of the land that we live on? What's our relationship with each other? What's our relationship with those who have less than we do, who are disadvantaged in comparison to us? Particularly examples like the increase in racism with the increase in refugees in Ireland. If these were happening on an individual level, person to person, we would very clearly be able to say that's as a result of, that's a trauma response, that's a defense mechanism, that's a structure that's been put in place in order to be, for one person to feel protected and more safe. But when it happens on a collective level, we seem unable to make the distinction and the connection between the two. For me, they're exactly the same. And so I see, how we as a culture and a society, how we're trying and failing, I think, largely to figure out what it is that has happened to us as a result of British colonialization, as a result of what our involvement with the Catholic Church and its power in our society, the power that we've given it, the power it took, and how that power is still wielded in schools, in our health system. The maternity hospital is a great example of that and what's happening there at the moment. And how we need to uncouple from those institutions of power, how we need to uncouple from those relationships of power, and without blaming, but actually take responsibility and say, yeah, 800 years of really shitty stuff happened to us. Now, what are we going to do about it? Instead of pointing fingers and saying it's all the Catholic Church's fault, it's all the Brits' fault, it's all et cetera, what are we going to do? And so we need to stop abdicating our power as a people and claim that back. And the only way that we can do that is by acknowledging the trauma and the traumatic experiences that did happen.
In relation to denial and say some of the historical abuses, I've heard some people, including family members of mine, kind of go, Asher, that's the past, that's ancient history, including a Secretary General of the Department of Justice used that type of language. Is that kind of indicative that, because it sounds very callous, but on the one hand, is it a defense mechanism to kind of go, we are very different people now, and also to kind of go, Asher, surely it can't be that bad. People are very resilient. We can bounce back from nearly anything. And what do we need to do to actually then how do we digest all these various traumas, including the famine and colonialism? There's so many of them. Is the first step just actually owning it as trauma and acknowledging that none of us really are unscathed, even if we maybe think we are? Is that part of it, do you think?
I think so. Yeah, I think nail on the head there, Jane. I think, you know, it's incredibly challenging. And it's incredibly challenging. I see this every day in my work. It is excruciating to open ourselves up and be vulnerable and say, I feel hurt. Here are the hurts that have happened to me. Here are the hurts that have happened to my family. Here are the hurts that have happened to my people. Because we feel the pain when we talk about it, when we acknowledge it, we have to connect with it in that way and then feel it. It's excruciating. I acknowledge that. And I think that we don't want to willingly say, yes, I want to sort of explore all of the painful experiences I've ever had, all the painful experiences my people have had for the last 1,000 years. Give it to me. Can't wait. Nobody's doing that. But if we want to really claim our power as a people, we have to open that box and look inside and see what's in it. And I think that's one of the reasons why your work, particularly the course that you teach, is so valuable, because that is allowing people to say, okay, that's what trauma looks like. How can, oh, look, I see it there. Once you see it, you can't stop.
It's true.
Once you see trauma, you can't unsee it. You can't stop seeing it. You start seeing it in people's bodies and how they walk, how they speak, how they breathe, how they relate to each other, how they make eye contact, how they don't. Once we start knowing that, we can't unknow it. And so I think the first step is acknowledgement. And that's painful. And that then makes me look at countries, like 2 countries in particular. It draws me to look at Canada and how Canada has approached the issue with Native Canadians, First Nation peoples. And it also makes me look at South Africa. It makes me look at how South Africa deals now and has done for the last 20, 30 years with apartheid, with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And so both of those countries, South Africa much more so than Canada, but both of those countries have been through excruciatingly painful experiences as a nation. Now, of course, not everybody has opted in. Of course, there are people who've said, I have no interest in that. That's not about me. I don't want to have anything to do with it. But as a nation, those 2 countries have really said, what has happened here? What has really happened here? How can we be truthful about this? And what needs to be done so that the people who've been harmed feel that they have been really heard, and that on an institutional level, on a national level, we ensure that this thread of memory is never lost, and that this thread of memory is never lost. Are you needed?
No, I just have a little visitor. Apologies, Beth.
That's okay, no worries.
Carry on. I hope we didn't interrupt your train of thought too much.
Not at all. You did, that's okay too.
Well, while you have a pause for breath there, then do you think this collective numbing, denial, whatever type of symptoms that manifest, can partly explain our political reluctance and the inaction at times, or the botched action of policymakers, and indeed maybe the experts that they might entrust with various inquiries to effectively engage and also compassionately engage with survivors? Because they'll be looking for proofs that maybe don't exist some of the time, and treat people perhaps as on the make or as fabricating stories, or so it seems to me as an outsider.
I think that's such an interesting question. And since we connected on Twitter, you've had you've influenced how I see those policymakers, those academics, those people in government. And I've found some extra compassion somewhere in my compassion stores. And I've come to realize that as a nation, we're all impacted by the trauma of our collective experience. So why would I expect policymakers, civil servants, TDs to be less impacted by those traumas than anybody else?
Wow, that's so interesting.
Why would I expect that?
Mm. Indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've learned that from you.
Okay, well, I'm sorry in a way, but it's true. It's kind of true because they're people too.
Exactly.
And we don't know what they experienced.
We have no idea what they've experienced. But if I, an Irish civil servant whose family has been living here for generations has experienced exactly the same thing as every other Irish person, simply by the nature of being Irish. So why would I expect him or her to be any less impacted, any more aware than anybody else? But we do that. And I can see that within survivor communities, that there is a desire to point fingers, there is a desire to blame, there is a desire to abdicate responsibility, to try to put power in the hands of people who perhaps don't deserve that power, perhaps don't know what to do with it. And when actually that power possibly would be better used being taken back by the person who's trying to give it away. And so expecting civil servants, policymakers, academics, etc., to sort of be above the impact of these issues, these threads, these historical abuses, these collective ancestral traumas is ridiculous. Why would we do that to them? That's so unfair. So there's that. But I
didn't expect us to go down this road. It's fascinating.
But okay. So there's that. And I also think, what you do in terms of sharing about trauma, about attachment, all of those issues, that we can't assume that those in positions of power don't need that information. We have to assume that they possibly need it more than anybody else.
That's so interesting. Well, I agree with you on that. I think we can assume nothing. We can't assume that anyone knows any of this. And that everyone needs it. And some people, given the power that they wield and the decisions that they might be called upon to make, then they need it more.
Absolutely.
So, do you think then, Beth, I don't know about trauma training for all civil servants and judges and the like, and academics even, but do you think they do need the basics about 100%. How trauma manifests and how it can impact functioning?
100%. Let me give you two examples of why I think that. One example comes from I can't remember exactly which one it was, but it was one of the group meetings that Catherine Zappone held in relation to the Investigative Commission. And it was in a Dublin hotel. There were maybe close to 100, I would say, of us there, either women who had given birth or children who had been born in mother and baby homes. We broke into small groups, and in the small groups, people were invited to share their stories. There was maybe 20 or so in the small group that I was in, and there was such expectation, there was such hope in the room that simply by being there and sharing their truths, that would have an impact. It would have a meaningful impact on the outcome of the commission. It breaks my heart to think about what I witnessed in that room and the fact that it had little to no impact whatsoever, and possibly had a negative impact, actually. 70-something-year-old man, never shared his story publicly before, never told anybody other than his wife before what had happened to him as a child and an adolescent. Adopted from a mother and baby home, abused, used as essentially a farmhand, slept in a barn, for the majority of his later childhood and adolescent, treated horribly. His body was shaking as he was telling his story. The room was wrapped by him. There was no support post-meeting whatsoever, nothing. And he was far from alone in the people who was in that position. I was just gobsmacked that the meeting was so uncontained that was allowed to happen. So this man shares really vulnerably, and then he leaves. What happens to him? Well, where does that go? Where does that experience go? And so the meeting was created by civil servants. Obviously, nobody had a conversation around, well, what if this happens? What if people do that? Maybe we should have some kind of counseling available for people afterwards. Maybe we should even just have a phone number available.
Yeah.
If we don't have a person, maybe we just have a phone number. No, nothing.
Yeah.
And so I guarantee, I mean, the room was buzzing with anger. You could feel it, you could slice it with a knife, with anger and high emotion and upset, and no support at all for people who've been at that meeting. That's one example, I think, where the enormity of the impact of the trauma that people experienced was absolutely not just disregarded, but it wasn't even considered a possibility. And so that, sorry, go ahead.
Trauma blind, completely knew nothing actually about what it does to people.
Nothing, no awareness whatsoever. I mean, I was horrified. Second piece of that, the second example of that is there are some academics who are unopen to any kind of connection or communication with some survivors. I think that's unacceptable, regardless of the reason. If somebody's being abusive, if somebody's being, if somebody is treating someone in an abusive manner, of course you don't want to engage with that person. But if someone's never, made any kind of connection, made any kind of comment, blocking people on social media who are speaking about the topics when they've never had any communication or connection with them previously, I think it's unacceptable. And so for me, there's a lack of awareness. I don't know how much a trauma-informed perspective plays in that, but perhaps if people had a greater awareness, greater knowledge of the impact of trauma, that they would not undertake actions like that, for example.
That's an interesting one, because you would think if you're talking about choice and voice and elevating the survivor experience and not sealing records and all of these things, that you should actually prioritize voices, even if they're uncomfortable to hear.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, yes, if they get aggressive, that's a different matter, because then your own defensive responses might kick in, and it's like, well, I need to assert my boundaries,
Absolutely. And that should be respected and recommended. Yeah, for sure. But you're absolutely right. I think if a survivor voice, regardless of how uncomfortable it is, for whatever reason, if it's not being abusive and it's not being aggressive, if that voice is shut down, then simply, very clearly, what we have is more of the same.
Yeah, traumatic reenactment again, really, isn't it?
Exactly. It's exactly the same as the parish priest 20 or 30 years ago saying, oh, that never happened. It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
And I also look at that through the lens of, why would I expect people, for example, in this example, academics, to be above the impact of trauma? And yet I do, because I think if and I would use myself as this example, if I set myself up as a professional doing a particular job, I have expectations of myself. Other people are right to have expectations of me. And one of those, if we're talking about listening to voices, is that one should actually listen to the voices.
Yes, at a basic level.
Yeah.
But I do think, I interviewed Stephen Porges before, and he did say about academia being a very hostile environment, and how your body your nervous system is in a constant state of evaluation, which is actually a very uncomfortable place to be. So I think there can be some very thin egos or brittle egos that then when challenged in any way, the walls come up.
Yeah.
But part of becoming trauma informed is actually knowing how you're reacting, tuning into your body and knowing what's happening. And it might actually be useful from that point of view alone to kind of go, I am not my opinions even, or I am not my work necessarily. Just like I'm not my trauma, it's an aspect.
Exactly.
but there is again a dissociative splitting almost there, to say on the one hand we elevate voice of survivors, and on the other hand we shut it down mercilessly if it doesn't accord. So then how would you like those in positions of power and lawyers and academics to interact with survivors, Beth? Like, what guidance would you offer them?
I guess there's two pieces to that. One is they would go to a workshop run by Jane Mulcahy about about trauma-informed.
Why me and not you? Yeah. We can do a joint one, Beth.
Yeah, I'm up for that. That there would be an awareness and knowledge of, okay, here's what may be going on for the people that I say that I am in service to. Am I actually really in service to those people? What's getting in the way of that service? And so part of what's getting in the way of that service is a lack of knowledge around trauma. Mm-hmm. So what is it that these people have experienced that maybe is not my experience, but that I do need to understand in order to be of proper service to those people, if that's what I'm saying I'm doing. And of course, the second piece of that, and once you get people into a room for a workshop, the main piece of that is, okay, what's being triggered in you? What's being, activated in you that is challenging that thin ego? And what do we need to do in order to support you to be able to do your job to the best of your ability, so that you can be of service to the people you want to be of service to the best of your ability.
And just one final question, because I said I told you maybe 40 minutes, and I don't know how long we've gone on now. But do you think that the legal system or these quasi-judicial type of processes are conducive to healing for survivors? Or is there scope for additional relational wounding there in just taking part, like you have taken part, and elderly women have taken part in that man you discussed?
I guess my initial response is, oh my God, no. But then when I reflect on it for a second, for some people, I think there is a healing in that, yes. For some people, an apology is what they want, and they feel they're done. For some people, they want a memorial, and that's the healing they want, and they're done. For some people, they will not participate. And this is one of the reasons why I don't participate in any of the survivor groups anymore, because there isn't agreement on any of these topics. And I just find that a too difficult an environment to be in. But for some people, there's no question that they will get involved whatsoever in any kind of memorialization project until there is an apology that they feel is significant enough. And so and that's healing for them. For other people, healing is, I don't want anything to do with any of it. I'm just going to grow vegetables and, have my relationship with my cats and my husband. And I don't want anything to do with any of it. And that's healing for them. So I think healing, there is no one size fits all.
Sure.
And I think that in itself is something that people, in positions of power, people in government, people involved in commissions, investigations, NGOs, advocacy groups, etc., need to be cognizant of what is healing for people, and that there isn't a one size fits all approach to that. There isn't here is the singular survivor narrative, and this is what we're presenting. We are not a homogenous group of people. People who've experienced trauma are not a homogenous group of people. There are different needs, different wants. Yes, there are commonalities, but there are varying needs and wants, and healing looks different for different people. And so to even just have an awareness of that is useful, I think.
And are there steps that we can take to avoid re-traumatization? Like you mentioned, I love the fact that you used the word uncontained there. And years ago, I wouldn't have known what you meant, but now I think I do. In the safe containment and the fact that there would be maybe a capacity to debrief, or as you say, counselors or psychotherapists on hand if people needed it, to kind of hold the people. Are those types of, like, if you were, well, not you going to a future event like that, but if civil servants or academics were going to organize another one, should they think about having the safe containment and holding environment for people, that it's not just splurge it all out for the first time in 70 years and then walk away?
Yeah, absolutely. There's, a reflection around what could happen here, what's possible that might happen here in this space. What do we want not to happen? How do we make sure that doesn't happen? What do we want to happen? How do we try to ensure that that happens? And to think about the possibilities. And again, I think this comes back to, what you teach in terms of what is someone's response likely to be, possible to be, and how can we either ensure that that doesn't happen, so that somebody isn't overexposed, they don't they don't have what I call a vulnerability hangover. So they don't overshare one day and then the next day think, oh my God, why did I say that? That's just, I wish I could take that back. So there isn't a vulnerability hangover. And what can we provide that, in that space that allows people to feel supported then, without, offering, taking the example of that meeting, without offering 8 sessions of psychotherapy to every person who attends, but also equally ensuring that a small group is facilitated in such a way that it doesn't allow for that kind of overexposure in an inappropriate way when someone doesn't have the response, but doesn't have the support afterwards.
This has been Relationship Matters with me, Jane Mulcahy, and the wonderful Beth Wallace. Take care.